then I will just make a few extra comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Tory, members of the executive. The Indian residential school system in Canada spanned approximately 150 years, the last school only closing in 1996. It was an attempt to forcibly assimilate Aboriginal children into white European systems and culture. It's now recognized as a horrific aspect of Canadian history that resulted in both the cultural and physical genocide of First Nations children and leading to generations of trauma. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission published its final report this past June, making 94 recommendations. These recommendations come directly from the heartbreaking testimonies of courageous survivors of this abusive system. In his closing remarks, Justice Murray Sinclair, one of the commissioners, said, "Words are not enough. As commissioners, we have described for you a mountain. We have shown you the path to the top. We call upon you to do the climbing." Among Canadian cities, Toronto holds one of the largest numbers of Aboriginal peoples in this country. As a community of faith, Bathurst Street United Church is committed to forging new and right relations with all First Nations people, but especially with those of us in this community, a relationship that is built on respect, equity, and justice. The recommendations in 1016 are the roadmap to forging these new and right relations with this city's Aboriginal communities. At a congregational meeting held during the service last Sunday, November 29th, Bathurst Street United Church unanimously voted to call on the City of Toronto to adopt this motion. However, we have 4 additional requests. Paragraph 2 calls for a plan. However, in order to ensure that this plan is implemented in concrete and visible ways, we ask that the City Manager report back regularly to Council, at least quarterly, and to the public on the degree to which it has met its commitments to concrete action made in accordance with 1016 paragraph 2. We call on the City to pay special attention to those recommendations that address the needs of Aboriginal youth, women, health, education, cultural sovereignty, and housing for First Nations peoples. Be it through art installations or any other creative means, we also call on the City to make concrete efforts to continually educate the public on the history of the Indian residential school system. Aboriginal youth bring with them incredible resources, and we encourage you to utilize the creative resources to implement this ongoing education. I'm aware that Mayor Tory, that you were able this summer to visit the pavilion at Fort York and see some of the work of the Aboriginal youth artists. Finally, paragraph 3 calls on the Ontario and Canadian governments to act in partnership with Canada's Aboriginal communities. In implementing these recommendations, it's essential that the City of Toronto as well commits to full consultation with First Nations communities, agencies, and peoples in the city. I'm a 5th generation Torontonian. I never spoke to my grandfather about these issues. But I know because of his involvement with the federal government and the municipal government of his day, that he certainly would have been aware of what was going on. And he probably was a supporter of the Indian Act and the residential school program. I'm a long-time member of the United Church. The United Church is complicit in building the residential school system and maintaining it for decades. It's very difficult to live with that. It's very difficult to understand that, and that's why education is a critical aspect of the recommendations of the TRC. But it's not just education. It's all 4 parts of this motion. It's all 94 recommendations of the TRC. As Justice Sinclair said, the TRC has described the mountain, they've pointed out the path. It's now the job of all citizens, the federal, provincial, and the municipal levels of government to join and climb that mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Meredith.
I just want to add just a few points. We spend a lot of time writing and reflecting on this document because our community has been actively involved in finding ways and looking for relationships in which we can enact these recommendations. And so I think that's also key, that my concern and our hope is that this report, these recommendations, among many, many reports that have been done over the last decades does not end up on the shelf, and that in fact it becomes a living document, a guide towards developing regulations with First Nations people in this city. We're aware, though, that whether or not as a community we get involved in this issue and we become partners and allies, First Nations people are moving forward. They are ensuring that their sovereignty is going to be respected, that their territory lands are protected, and that human rights are being honored. We do believe strongly that by adopting and taking concrete action on these recommendations, we can become part of that new historical moment that will turn us from a legacy of 500 years of colonization and abuse to one of right relations, nation-to-nation negotiations, and healthy communities. So I just want to reiterate that we will look to the council quarterly or however you decide, but regularly for reports and ways in which these new relationships have been built in concrete ways so that these relationships and nation-to-nation and community-to-community efforts will be made. Thank you so much. And just to end, yes, good luck in Paris, and we do have many Indigenous voices leading the call for justice for our climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Merritt. Questions of the deputies? Thank you very much for a very thoughtful presentation. Much appreciated. Are there any questions of staff with respect to this matter? Are there those wishing to speak from members of council? Councilor Layton.
Thank you very much. As the city's representative on the Aboriginal Advisory Committee for the last 5 years, I wanted to thank all of you for entertaining this motion that actually comes from that committee in recognizing the atrocities that occurred for over 100 years until very recently, until the 80s. And it's difficult to talk about, and I don't talk about it without having a kind of uncomfortable feeling in my stomach about how it would have been possible that in as recent as my father's generation, that something like this would have happened in a country like Canada. A country that where how I grew up was everyone had every opportunity and was treated respectfully and with dignity. And to learn that I was 7 years old when the last school closed or something around thereabouts. Aboriginal women didn't even have the vote at the time of my birth, which is really like something maybe for some of you that doesn't seem like such a stretch. No offense. Sorry, that was my lightening of the mood with an age joke, but.
I don't know what kind of a point it is.
Yeah, well,
you gestured at me when you said
yeah,
that.
well, I did. Well, you're at the end of the room, and at the big side,
I say I am the old man.
if Councilor Kelly was here, I would have done the same.
You can carry out with your remarks.
But I get this uneasy feeling, and in some rooms it's very difficult to talk about, particularly I think for those who haven't spent time with Aboriginal communities and leaders in our community. I had the opportunity to go and attend the last of the reconciliation events in Edmonton in 2014, I believe, and it made an offering on behalf of the City of Toronto, which was our statement of commitment to Aboriginal peoples, to that process. I also gave a story from my own family lore, which I'll say in more detail at council if this gets there, which I'm confident it will. But I just wanted to state that it's okay to feel a little bit uncomfortable with this subject matter. It's okay to feel a little bad, as long as you get that feeling in your stomach that there's something you want to do about it. Because I've found that the best part of reconciliation is the peace that you find with recognizing it internally, but also finding out what you can do to make a difference in that. And I think that the mayor, I actually know that the mayor and others who were at the last Federation of Canadian Municipalities meeting really got the sense that the mayor of Edmonton got that and was excited about what they could accomplish together to overcome the atrocities that happened. Because we can't, an apology isn't enough and we can't go back and write them. So all we have is what we can move forward from here. I hope, and I know that in the coming months and years, the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee will be coming forward with requests and recommendations to this committee around advocating other levels of government, around policy changes that they'll request on our programs, and there will likely be some budget requests that come in that. And I certainly hope that with this support today, that you'll also give careful consideration and remember the support you're giving today to those requests as they come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Others wishing to speak? May I just say in all seriousness before calling the question to Councilor Layton, and I say, you have the beauty and wonder of a new child. That child, probably based on precedent, will be sitting here one day or someplace like this and wondering how you and you know, and your father, who of course many of us knew well, could have not thought about something, whether it had to do with the environment. It's a consciousness thing, and now thanks, and I think the comments made earlier on were very relevant in terms of education being key to this. We've got people, there's still to this day a lot of people who don't know what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was all about and what the residential schools were, and they are a part of our history, like it or not, they are a part of our history, and I think that we just gotta always work at these things, and some of the recommendations here and some of the comments we received from you in terms of your additional comments, I think are definitely more than food for thought for us in terms of making sure that, you know, you absolutely guarantee that these kinds of things can't be repeated by making sure people understand what they were. I'll certainly be supporting this today, and I'm sure we'll get broad support across the table. Thank you for your leadership again and making sure this came here from the Aboriginal Affairs Committee, and thank you to our delegates. Anybody else that wants to speak this afternoon? All right, and then we're ready to call the question. It's the recommendations here are amended. All those in favor?
So record a vote.
Record a vote.
On the item, all those in favor, Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Crawford, Councillor McMahon, Deputy Mayor William Wong, Mayor Tory, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Shiner, and carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all again, and I think that brings us to our final item of the day.